I'd like to begin with the witness from California, Mr. Ortega. You noted in your testimony about the challenges you're facing with this invasive non-native species called nutria that's also been a problem in other parts of the country. My understanding is you have funding for eradication for 2 years, but what happens after that?
A serious deficit. No long-term funding has been secured. We think the effort will require about $5 million annually. $5 million currently will support 45 staff at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And the source of that funding is?
The San Joaquin Delta Conservancy has issued a one-time appropriation and the amount of $10 million. CDFW is also reallocating staff, biologists, to this effort. So those folks should be doing their normal day-to-day jobs, but yeah, I fear that if we don't secure some long-term funding, we're going to have a real hard time controlling this outbreak.
And are you aware of the experiences in Maryland and Louisiana and their eradication efforts and what sources of funding that they were able to bring together?
Yeah, there's actually federal funding available here in the East that currently do not extend to California through the eradication program.
Well, that's something I think we ought to look at in terms of a comprehensive effort. If it's applicable in Maryland and Louisiana, obviously we think it would be appropriate in California. And, you know, a lot of these efforts are a result of cost sharing anyway, local, state, and federal, so we should work on that. You noted in your testimony, again, the impacts on waterways and levees and the importance of those waterways to deliver water to agriculture and urban water users. Could you talk more specifically, have you had any cost analysis on potential impacts in agriculture?
No specific cost analysis have been conducted. The Central Valley is a very flat area, and most of the water is wheeled through earthen line canals. And so the extensive burrowing that can occur can really compromise.
I understand it's hundreds of feet, and they establish these caves within these levees in which you'll have colonies of nutria that begin breeding, as you noted, after 4 months, and with
That's
40
correct.
offspring, the propagation of this species obviously is very problematic.
Absolutely, yeah. The burrowing is extensive, and because of the density in these colonies, one example is they pulled 100 nutria out of a 10-acre pond. So they're very gregarious, and they can attack, you know, specific infrastructure. If we don't start to get control of these and they do migrate into the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, I think that's the biggest threat that agricultural faces. The Delta is a highly managed system to provide water throughout the state.
Well, Mr. Harder has legislation on that effort, of which I'm a co-sponsor, and we'll continue to work with them. Hopefully he'll get back here before the committee finishes its hearing. Mr. Erickson and Mr. Reichert, you talked about the importance of the impact of trade, and I noted that in my opening comments. I think we all here in the subcommittee believe that that's absolutely critical, and that to ensure that we have enough resources in our ports so that inspections are done thoroughly. That was part of the problem I had with this tomato seed issue in China, where we had to try to provide some alternative support. And I think that's why, as you all noted, that Mr. Vela's legislation that many of us are co-sponsoring to introduce Protecting America's Food and Agriculture Act to make sure that we can hire more ag inspectors at our ports of entry. What kind of backlog are you folks seeing due to the lack of inspectors, and what impact does that have on specialty crop growers and consumers?
So it's not uncommon we're a domestic producer, but we do import product to complement our business. And I would say once a month on average, perhaps, a couple times a month, we run into issues where a load of cilantro or broccoli crowns or something coming out of Mexico gets held up at the port of entry because of insect identification, and the local inspectors may not have the authority to identify that insect, so then the insect needs to be sent up to Washington, D.C. So it takes maybe, occasionally we see shipments that may take 3 to 4 to 5 days to receive an insect identification, when it's something that's out of the ordinary, at which time we typically would have to dump the load or send it to the food bank. It would no longer be salvageable for us. So it's not...
More examples of that will be important as we try to move this legislation forward. Mr. Reichert, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No. To follow up on Mr. Erickson's experiences, we see about the same in the Port of Philadelphia. Generally, we handle more of the imported commodities. Our CBP inspector staff is down by, I believe, 4 inspectors. Our APHIS inspector count is generally at 6. We understand they are losing 2 of their people through a vertical integration. So they have offers out there now for additional inspectors. 2 would be the minimal. As Mr. Erickson said, the identifiers are also in need. Certain commodities, if they cannot be inspected or identified locally, must be sent down to Baltimore area, and that can, in the...
Bottom line is we need more help.
Yes, we do.
Okay. I've exceeded my time, and I'd like to defer now to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Rouser from